Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to walk through our observations of the traffic at each of the sites. So as Lee already alluded to, we had a total of 5 sites that we were really looking at, and that was the existing Hadley School site, the existing Stanley School and middle school sites, and the Phillips Park site, as well as the DPW site that I don't believe that Lee actually did mention. And there were really 6 different categories that we looked at when we were evaluating the traffic, and that was traffic congestion, safety, the student density, the walkability around each school, the queuing in terms of pickup and drop off queue storage areas, and parking. And I'll explain how each one of these is important as we kind of go through each one of them. But we went into this process really with no preconceived notions about any of the sites. We treated all of them the same, and as far as we were concerned, everyone in the class started with an A, and it was up to them to really keep it as we walk through each one of these pillars here. So if you want to advance to the next slide. So the first thing that we looked at was really traffic congestion. And the biggest component of traffic congestion is obviously the vehicular volumes. So we mapped out all of the roadways within the town in terms of their functional classification and the volumes of traffic on each of the roadways. And you can see here that the roads that are shown in red represent your arterial roadways that carry the heaviest traffic volumes through the town. The roads that are shown in the yellow color represent the collector roads that carry kind of intermediate traffic volumes that are kind of carrying traffic from the local roads onto the arterial roadways. And then the gray roads are showing the local roads that are generally low traffic volumes. And one of the reasons that this is important is because locating a school on an already congested roadway can exacerbate the situation, causing the road to exceed capacity. And the reason that's so important in a community like Swampscott is because there's very limited ability to actually expand any of these roads and provide additional capacity because of limited right-of-way and existing buildings right up against the edge of the roadway. So we really want to try and maximize the capacity of the existing roadways and not create additional congestion. Congestion also can be a deterrent to walking to school, which can create then more drop-off and pickup activity and create more congestion, creating kind of that never-ending cycle. So we've ranked each one of these schools here on this map in terms of the congestion that's surrounding the roadways. And we've ranked them from most favorable, shown in the dark blue color, down to least favorable, shown in the light blue color. And if you look here, you can see that the DPW site and the Phillips Park site are located right on Route 1A and Route 129, which are heavily congested roadways. They carry high traffic volumes, and adding additional traffic from a school onto those roadways could create an even worse situation and could also be a deterrent for people walking and biking to school as well. The Hadley School is it's located close to Route 129, but it is off on a side street on Reddington Street that's a little bit less congested. And the middle school sites and Stanley School sites are located on low volume local roadways without a lot of congestion on them.
Rebecca, this is Lee. A big question that's being asked is the timing of your study. Did you look in the morning when it was congested? Did you look at traffic times and things like that? Can you explain that methodology?
Yes, absolutely. So that was one of the things that I was going to mention is, so we've created all of these kind of nice maps, which maps are great, but really nothing is better than observing traffic. So we did actually go and do observations at each one of these sites during the morning drop-off period and the afternoon pickup period. Now, obviously at the Phillips Park and DPW sites, there's no active pickup and drop-off going on, but we did observe existing travel patterns in those areas around those sites at that same time so that we would understand what impacts the additional traffic from a school being added there might have. And I will later in the presentation walk through all of those observations in detail and talk about what type of impacts we would expect in terms of additional traffic and queuing and all of that from each of from this new school being located at each of those locations. If we want to advance to the next one. So the next thing that we did was we mapped the student population. So we got the addresses of all of the students in grades K through 5 and mapped them out, as you can see here. So the dark areas represent high concentrations of student population, while the lighter areas represent low numbers of student population. And ideally, you want to locate a school close to the center of the student population because it reduces the number of vehicle miles traveled for parent drop-off and pickup activity for vehicles getting to school, which thereby also reduces the traffic congestion. It also maximizes the walking potential for people getting to the school. And one unique aspect about Swampscott as well is that there's currently no busing provided because of having 3 neighborhood elementary schools. So by providing a school that is central to the population of the entire town, you could potentially provide a consolidated school that also would not have a busing requirement. So here we can see that the Hadley School and the DPW school sites are located very close to the center of the majority of the student population. The middle school site is a little bit further away, but still pretty close to a very high source of students right nearby on the Forest Avenue corridor. The Phillips Park site is also relatively close to the student population, but starts to get a little bit further away. But one of the important things about the Phillips Park site is that Route 129, because it is so congested, really creates kind of a barrier to a lot of those kids getting to school. And then last is the Stanley School that starts to get a little bit further away from the majority of the population. Do you want to move to the next one? So this one is evaluating safety, which safety obviously is important and was really the primary concern of all of our review. If it is an unsafe situation, people won't walk, which will create more congestion and thereby creating more conflict near the school and creating an even more dangerous situation. So what we've done here is we've mapped all of the crashes that occurred over the latest 3-year period from 2017 to 2019 within the town. And what you see here is the red and yellow and red areas represent the concentration of crashes. The blue and green dots that you see represent pedestrian or bicycle related crashes. And what we see here is that the DPW site is located right on Route 1A, right where there is a very high concentration of crashes at the driveway. The Hadley School site is located a little bit off of Route 129, but there is another crash cluster located right on Route 129. And both of those schools have a lot of pedestrian crashes also in the surrounding area. Now, the majority of the ones near the Hadley School on Route 129 are actually happening during the summertime and are more related to people going to the beach. But again, it is still a vehicular crash cluster as well. The Phillips Park School is located just a little bit up the street from a crash cluster on 129. And then the middle school and Stanley sites are located on more low volume roadways that really don't experience a lot of crashes. Want to advance to the next one? So really all these things are highly related to each other. The best site is really one that's kind of central to the student population that doesn't require much of the population to cross over busy, dangerous roadways and is in a kind of a low volume, safe area. So what you can see here is kind of that area that becomes sort of the sweet spot for locating a school in an ideal world that's highlighted in the yellow dashed area. And we see that the DPW site and Phillips Park site are kind of right on the borders, but really outside of kind of that area that provides safety, low congestion, low traffic volumes, and close to the student population, where the middle school, Stanley School, and Hadley School sites all kind of fall within that range. You want to advance to the next one? So the next thing that we looked at was the walkability of the areas around the school to assess what's the likelihood that kids will walk to the school. So what we've done is we've taken that student population information that we had previously shown, and we looked at various walk zones around each of the schools, showing a quarter of a mile, a half a mile, a 3/4 of a mile, and a 1 mile walking distance. And that's walking along each of the roadways. So it's not as the crow flies, but actually walking along the roads. And you can see those shown in the various purple colors on the map, where the dark purple represents people within the 1/4 mile, and the lighter purple colors go out to a 1 mile radius around the school. And then we compared these to the walkability rankings for each of the school, or the walk to school scores for each of the roadways. And those scores get calculated based on the geometry of the roadway, the volumes and speeds of traffic traveling on the roadways, whether or not there's a sidewalk provided, whether there's a sidewalk on both sides of the road, and what the condition of that sidewalk is, as well as whether or not it complies with ADA requirements as well. So what you can see here is that the darker colors represent a road that is very walkable, where sidewalks are provided. It tends to be lower volume roadways, or there's some type of separation between the vehicle traffic and the pedestrian traffic. The lighter blue colors represent the low walkability roadways, where there may be steep grades, there may not be sidewalks provided, or there may be high traffic volumes that are a deterrent for walking. And what we see here is that the majority of the roads surrounding the Hadley School are very walkable roads. They have very high rankings of walkability. And there are about 500 out of the 900 total K through 12 students that fall within that 1 mile walk zone. So there's a high likelihood of capturing a large number of the students that would actually be walking to school on fair weather days to the Hadley School. Do you want to advance to the next one? So we did the same thing for each of the other schools. So this is the Stanley School here, and you can see that for the Stanley School, because it is located a little bit further away from the population, that there's only about a little under 300 students that fall within that 1 mile walk zone. But one of the great things about the Stanley School is that a lot of those roads do rank very high in terms of walkability, particularly the roads that are immediately adjacent to the school. So there is a high potential of capturing a lot of those 300 kids as walking to school. You want to advance to the next one? So this one is the Phillips Park site. And Phillips Park is similar to the Hadley School in that it captures about 400 kids within that 1 mile walk zone. But one of the things that's important to note about the Phillips Park site is that Route 129 is a heavily congested roadway, and that the majority of the student population is actually located on the opposite side of Route 129. Also, a lot of the roadways on the north side of Route 129 have very steep grades, making it difficult for kids to walk on those roadways, particularly for ADA access on those roadways. So that's likely to be a deterrent to walking to school that doesn't really get reflected when you look at just the walking map of where the student population is located. Do you want to advance to the next one? So here's the middle school. And again, middle school is very similar to the Hadley School as well. About 450 kids fall within the 1 mile walk zone. And those roads surrounding the middle school are also very walkable. So it's likely that a high number of those will actually walk to school. And I think that also gets reflected when we did observations at the middle school, because a very large number of the middle school students were actually already walking to school. So it's likely that if there were an elementary school located on the site, that a lot of those students would walk to school as well. And the last one. So the last one is the DPW site, which is very similar to Phillips Park. It captures about 400 kids within the 1 mile walk zone. But again, Route 1A cuts right through the middle of that walk zone and really creates a barrier for walking to school. In fact, for Route 1A, it's probably even more a barrier than along Route 129, because there are a lot of high intensity commercial driveways that are located along Route 1A that really create a barrier for pedestrians trying to walk, as they experience a lot of conflict with vehicles turning in and out of the driveways, even walking along Route 1A. And the grades in that area also make it very difficult for pedestrians walking to school. So if you want to advance to the next one. So as I mentioned before, looking at the maps is great, but obviously observing traffic and how it actually operates is really very important. So that was one of the things that we did go out and do, was observe traffic during the morning and the evening hours to see how things really work out here. So this is looking at kind of the Hadley School and the area around it. And I'll kind of walk through our observations, kind of going from the left side of the page over to the right side of the page. So one of the issues with the Hadley School is that there's really no off-street queuing area for pickup and drop-off activity to happen. So as a result, long queues form down Reddington Street for about a 30-minute period every morning. And then again in the afternoon. And one of the difficulties in the afternoon is that parents are kind of competing to be the first one to grab their kid and get out of the area. So parents are arriving long before the school actually releases and trying to use any parking spaces that are available in the surrounding area to wait for school to be released so that they can pick up their kids and get out of the area. So this results in long queues forming on Reddington Street, as I mentioned, and some queuing and capacity issues at the signal at Humphrey Street and Reddington Street as well. There's a crosswalk down at the Humphrey Street intersection where vehicles parked on the street will actually park across the crosswalk, blocking access to the crosswalk and creating sightline issues for vehicles that are trying to exit out of Reddington Street. There is a crosswalk that is located right in front of the school, right at the intersection of Blaney Street, but it's not marked and it's not ADA accessible. There's no ADA accessible curb ramps to that crosswalk. And the queued up traffic for pickup and drop off activity blocks visibility of that crosswalk, particularly in the afternoon when kids are walking from the school towards Blaney Street. That queued traffic up against the school sidewalk blocks visibility of pedestrians walking in that area. There's also a section where there is legal on-street parking allowed between Rockland Street and King Street. And the on-street parking in this area kind of forces the traffic that's headed south down Reddington Street into the oncoming lane. Now that also happens as vehicles queue up for drop-off. Through vehicles will pull out around them into oncoming traffic, which creates the potential for a head-on collision. There's also a very wide pavement area in between Rockland Street and King Street. And there's no marked crosswalks in that area for kids walking on the opposite side of the street to get to the school. Moving a little bit closer up towards Sheridan Road, there's a section of sidewalk there that's in deteriorating condition. It has very limited curb reveal there, where someone could actually drive up onto the sidewalk in that area. And there are also a number of large trees that are blocking the sidewalk. So when we consider all of these things, the question that often gets asked is, how could you possibly accommodate any more kids on this site with all of these traffic issues that we've just identified? So Lee, if you want to advance to the next slide. So what we looked at was what options are there for how we could improve traffic in the surrounding area to be able to accommodate traffic. So right now, one of the things that happens kind of naturally is that traffic sort of creates a one-way pattern around the school, coming in on Monument Avenue and going along Elmwood Road, up Sheridan Road, and back down Reddington Street. Elmwood Road today is a one-way roadway in the direction that's shown on this graphic. So we would propose formalizing that one-way pattern all the way around as a policy and directing traffic to utilize that as a route into and out of the Hadley School site. Reddington Street itself would become one-way headed southbound, and this could be done either by time of day, just during school hours, or as a permanent conversion. Doing it as a permanent conversion has a lot of safety benefits as well as parking benefits for the surrounding neighborhood, which I will walk through and describe to you. So with providing a new school, there is the ability to provide some off-street queuing area right in front of the school for pickup and drop-off activities. But based on the population of the school and the number of parents that we saw actually dropping off already with a neighborhood school, that is still likely to back up out onto Reddington Street. So that area wouldn't be long enough to accommodate all of the queue. But by converting the roadway to one-way traffic flow, you could create a stacking area for pickup and drop-off activity along the side of Reddington Street and use what was formerly the northbound lane on Reddington Street as a through lane for traffic to continue flowing south down Reddington Street. And this would provide some overflow parking too for events that might happen at the school, or weekend traffic and traffic for the beach as well in the summertime, to be able to provide some parking in that area. We would also recommend removing that wide open pavement expanse between Rockland Street and King Street. And that could be done in a couple of different ways, either by constructing a large bump out and landscaped area in that way that could be used like a pocket park, or by adding in head-in or angled parking in that area as well, which would provide some overflow parking for the school. And then also converting King Street and Rockland Street to one-way roads to help to disperse traffic as it's coming in and out of the school area along King Street, Rockland Street, and Blaney Street, as well as alternative routes to dispersing all the traffic out through Humphrey Street. Converting those to one-way roadways also has added benefit, where Rockland Street right now is two-way and has on-street parking. And because of its narrow width, people are actually parking up on the sidewalk right now, blocking access to the sidewalk. So by converting that to one-way, on-street parking could be accommodated within the existing pavement width, and the sidewalk could be kept clear for pedestrians walking. If you want to move to the next slide. So this slide is really just summarizing all of the items that we looked at for the Hadley School in terms of congestion, safety, student density, walkability, queuing, and parking. And each place where you see the green plus indicates that the site is able to meet the criteria for that one item, or that it is in some way beneficial in terms of that one item. Wherever you see the yellow circle is really neutral. It means that there might be issues, but there are ways to overcome them, or that they're not major issues, but things certainly to be considered. And a red minus, although one doesn't appear for the Hadley School, a red minus means that the site really doesn't work well for that item. So we evaluated all of these schools on each of these 6 categories. and also looked at in terms of the enrollment options. So the Hadley School site is already working for the existing enrollment of about 390 students, but it could also work for a larger enrollment of 540 to 565 students with option 1 or 2. So overall, Hadley is located in close proximity to a large portion of the student population. It has very walkable streets, but it is located close to congested Route 129, and all the traffic exiting would have to go out towards Route 129, which is a crash cluster as well. And there is limited ability to provide off-street pickup and drop-off areas and parking. So some concerns, but overall it can work at the Hadley School. So the Stanley School site is a little bit unique because it has very limited parking on the site itself. So all of that parking is reserved for staff. As a result, all of the parent traffic is parking along Orchard Road and Nason Road out in the neighborhoods, and then walking their students in onto the school campus. There's also a one-way circulation pattern that happens right now on Orchard Street, which is not signed very well right now. There are some signs that just out on Humphrey Street that say no left turn between 7 a.m. and 2 p.m., I believe, or 3 p.m. And so it's not signed very well. There's no do not enter signs or anything like that to let people know that that pattern is really happening. So it can create some additional congestion with all of that traffic having to come in, parents parking along the streets, walking their kids into the school, and then coming back out again. Although there are sidewalks provided along both sides of the street, there are also large trees that are located in these sidewalks that are all circled in red. And in some cases, those trees completely block the sidewalk. There is a couple of informal trails that go through the wetlands just to the south of the school and connect into Forest Avenue to the east and over to the Unitarian Universalist Church to the west of the Stanley School site. And there were parents observed using that walkway as well to walk their students into the school. And a number of people were also observed parking in the church parking lot and then walking their kids into the school as well. One of the other things that we did also notice is that parents were parking up along Nason Road to drop off and pick up their students for both the middle school and the Stanley School as well. And we did notice a high volume of traffic that was flowing back and forth between the middle school and the Stanley School using Forest Ave, Laurel Road, and Nason Road as well. Because they have staggered start and end times, parents would drop off their kids over at the middle school and then cut across over to Stanley School to drop off their elementary school students there. There are a couple of busy crossings along Humphrey Street as well that are indicated here with a number 9 that don't have any signage to highlight the crosswalks. And then the intersection of Humphrey Street, Atlantic Avenue, and Puritan Road, which is shown at numbers 13 and 14, is very awkward. It has a skewed angle to the intersection, which makes it wide. There's poor sight lines created by the geometry of the intersection and some of the islands that are located within the intersection to divide traffic actually block the sight lines for vehicles trying to exit the side streets. Although there is a crosswalk there located at number 14, just south of Puritan Road, and it is a signalized crosswalk there, that signal doesn't comply with design standards, and the location of the signal heads is very hard to see as you're approaching the signal coming around the corner from Humphrey Street or from Atlantic Avenue to the north approaching that. So again, looking at kind of all of these things, you would kind of question, how can a school possibly work here? So Lee, if you can advance the slide. So by constructing a new school out in the field next to the Stanley School, you can keep the Stanley School open while the new school is constructed. And you can create sort of a large one-way roadway that would circulate around the outside of the school campus and create a long storage area for pickup and drop off that could occur at multiple locations along the school property as well. By moving all of the parking onto the site, it gets the parent traffic out of the neighborhood and reduces the congestion as well. And then formalizing the one-way pattern along Orchard Road would help to reduce conflict points along that route by keeping all of the traffic flowing in a circular pattern, which would mostly occur all by right turns. It would be similar to the way a giant roundabout works, where everyone would be circulating in a right turn pattern. The one-way pattern also allows for the widening of the sidewalks into the roadway to avoid impacts to the trees and allow pedestrians to still be able to have a clear path to walk to the school. It also still provides an area for on-street parking for the surrounding neighborhood to utilize, while still keeping traffic flowing on the side streets. And it reduces some of that driver confusion over the time of day for the one-way pattern as well by formalizing it all the time. There is also a rail trail, a future rail trail that runs that dashed line that you see up at the top of the page, where you could provide a potential connection to that rail trail to increase the walking and biking to the school. This option also allows for traffic to enter the site via multiple entry points to disperse the traffic and reduce the impacts to the surrounding roads. So you can disperse traffic out over Humphrey Street to the north and south and out Forest Avenue as well towards the middle school through multiple entry points. By providing a connection over to the church, it creates another dispersion point and a potential for overflow parking for the school as well. And also provides an opportunity for a pedestrian connection through the church property to provide a formalized walking path that would be ADA accessible into the school. With all of these improvements shown right immediately adjacent to the school, we would also recommend upgrading the 2 pedestrian crossings that I mentioned out on Humphrey Street, which would likely have some type of flashing beacon at them to enhance the visibility of those crossings. And then somewhat of a complete intersection reconstruction down at Humphrey Street and Atlantic Avenue to kind of realign those roadways, tighten up those radii for those turning movements, reduce the crossing distances for pedestrians, and provide an enhanced pedestrian crossing that would likely be signalized as well. Lee, can you advance to the next one? So again, we kind of ranked all of the items for the Stanley School. And while the Stanley School is located central to the student population for generating walking trips, it's also located on uncongested roadways, and it provides ample area for creating a long storage and queuing area. It also provides the opportunity for multiple access and egress points to help disperse traffic along. Do you want to advance to the next one? So this is the Phillips Park site, and I'm going to go a little bit quickly through the Phillips Park site because I know we're getting tight on time, but also to kind of highlight that really this site doesn't meet a lot of the criteria. We mentioned already that Route 129 is heavily congested. The majority of the student population is on the north side and would have to cross over Route 129 to get into a school at this site. The existing driveway is narrow at its throat, so it would need to be widened to accommodate two-way traffic flow into the site. Although there are several residential roads immediately adjacent to the park, Lodge Road, Muriel Road, and Charlotte Road, that could provide additional access or egress points into the school. Those would also, providing a driveway through there would have impacts to the parklands and reduce the amount of parkland available here. And really, it would still force all traffic back out onto Route 129 in the end. So it's still creating that congestion on Route 129 while adding traffic into a residential neighborhood. So that one really wasn't an option for providing any type of dispersion of traffic here. As I did mention, that there are steep grades as well on a lot of the roads opposite the Phillips Park site as well. So this graphic is showing kind of what a school at this site would look like. So you can see there would be one driveway into the school that would come in and kind of circulate around right in front of the school to provide a drop-off area, and then go back out onto Humphrey Street. Because of the volume of traffic that would be coming in and out here, it's likely that a traffic signal would need to be installed out on Humphrey Street. And with the volume of pickup and drop-off activity that's likely to happen here, because walking would be so low, those queues are likely to extend back up onto Humphrey Street, creating additional congestion along the roadway. There is some parking area that is available, shown at number 9, but that area may also be flooded at times based on some of the wetland impacts, which I believe will be talked about more next week. But overall, what we found was that the Humphrey site really wasn't a great location in terms of meeting each of these criteria. If you want to advance to the next one, so we can see that it's located on a congested road. It's close to a crash cluster. It's a little bit further from the student density to begin with, but then the majority of the density that is close to it is on the opposite side of Route 129. The roads around it are not very walkable, and there's very limited ability to provide queuing, and that queuing could back up onto Route 129. And again, limited availability for parking as well. Want to advance to the next one? So this one is the middle school site here. So the middle school works kind of in conjunction with the Stanley School. You can see here that the traffic that I mentioned previously up along Nason Road, where parents drop off up in that area. The biggest notable item for the middle school, I think, is really the queuing that happens and the congestion that happens right in front of the school during particularly the morning hours, when parents are coming in and trying to drop off in the school driveway right in front of the door to the middle school. And one of the things that we noted for why this is actually happening is that there is a crosswalk located right at the front door to the school, where there's a section of sidewalk that's missing, that's shown on this graphic in red along the south side of Forest Avenue. And a large number of kids are walking along Forest Avenue on the opposite side from the school, coming from the west up towards the school, and then crossing right at the school driveway to get up to the school. There is a crossing guard that's located there to stop traffic, to allow these kids to cross. But because of the location of the crosswalk to the left or to the west of the driveway, these kids have to first cross Forest Avenue and then cross the driveway, basically crossing that heavy left turn volume that's turning into the school twice. And because the crossing guard is having to stop traffic twice for each pedestrian, it creates these long queues that extend back on Forest Avenue in both directions, and in some cases go all the way up Sargent Road as well. Do you want to advance to the next slide? So one of the ways we looked at trying to improve this is actually completing the sidewalk along the southerly side of Forest Avenue so that kids can walk in entirely on that side without having to make 2 crossings of the roadway. And the kids would then cross on Forest Avenue, where you can see the new crosswalk proposed at number 8. This would allow for the crossing guard to stop traffic that's headed westbound on Forest Avenue and allow the pedestrian to cross the road at the same time that traffic is turning into the middle school itself, and will really help to alleviate that traffic pattern that's happening right at the front door to the school. But that's not really the issue. The issue is a new school here. So we looked at the potential for a new school on the tennis courts back behind the middle school. And to accommodate this, we would provide a one-way entrance-only driveway from Nason Road that would circulate around the ball fields at the back of the school and come down through the rear parking lot and then circulate back out onto Forest Avenue. So it would have its own dedicated entrance to provide its own queuing area for the pickup and drop-off activities, but would have a shared egress out onto Forest Avenue with the middle school traffic. Right now, the lower parking lot of the middle school is very underutilized during the day. So that parking lot could be used to accommodate parking for the elementary school. That parking lot would not be large enough, though, to accommodate a 900 student school. It could accommodate a 540 to 565 school, but not a 900 student school. And with this, we would, with this, we would also recommend providing the pedestrian connections over to the Stanley School as well through the church property, where that could again be used as an off-site area for parking or an overflow area for parking, and could also be used in an alternative pickup and drop-off area as well. You want to advance to the next one? So this one is kind of summarizing how we rank the middle school. So the middle school is located on generally low volume, low congested roadways, with the exception of that area right in front of the middle school driveway. On roads that experience low collision patterns. It's close to the student density. It's on walkable roadways. But again, queuing and parking are the big issues for this school, where there's some constraints there on the availability to provide a drop-off area and adequate parking for schools of varying sizes. And that's why you see at the bottom that we've ranked this high in terms of accommodating options 2 and 3, but not so great at accommodating option 1. And option 1 really creates a lot of traffic concentrated all in one area by having all of the middle school and all of the elementary school kids in one area. You want to advance to the next one? So the last one is the DPW site. And again, I'll go kind of quickly through this one because really this site didn't work particularly well for a lot of reasons. So while the DPW site is located close to the Abbott Park and the future rail trail that provide benefits to this school location, it's right on Route 1A, which is a congested roadway. As I mentioned, there are a lot of curb cuts for commercial curb cuts along the road that create a lot of additional conflict. There's some intersections with wide open curb cuts as well that have long pedestrian crossings. The grading of the DPW site itself is also an issue because from front to back, the site goes up by about 30 feet in elevation. So the grading there is also difficult. If you want to advance to the next slide. So with this site, there's a very small area to be able to accommodate only a handful of cars for a pickup and drop off activity, which would likely result in large queues forming out on Route 1A that would create additional congestion along that roadway that only has one lane in each direction now. So that has the potential to create a gridlock situation. The only really available area for parking would be back behind the school, which would have to be accessed from the residential neighborhoods via Franklin Avenue and Suffolk Avenue. And that parking, again, would be separated in elevation from the front of the building by about 30 feet. There's also very limited space available for a play area on the site as well, so that area is very condensed. In terms of improvements, we have shown here numerous sidewalk improvements, closing up some of the curb cuts or narrowing the curb cuts to reduce those pedestrian crossing distances, installing hawk signals, which are the They're signals that are black unless they're activated by a pedestrian, and then they change to yellow and red to stop traffic. So installing those right in front of the school to be able to cross traffic over or cross pedestrians over the traffic as well. But really in the end, once you do all of those pedestrian improvements and everything, the queuing becomes the big issue where traffic has the potential to back up onto the roadway. If you want to advance to the next one. So this is kind of showing how the DPW site was ranked, where it's on a congested roadway right next to a high crash cluster. Even though it's close to the student population, Route 1A is really a barrier to about half of the population walking to the school. The roads are not very walkable. There's really no space for queuing, and there's not much space available for parking as well. So really the DPW site just didn't stack up on any of the levels. You want to go to the last slide? So this last one, we developed a matrix for kind of evaluating all of these, which this really just provides a summary of how each site stacks up against each of the items that we talked about. And as I mentioned before, kind of everyone in the class starts with an A at the beginning with the dark colored arrows. And as they fail each test, that arrow kind of drops in color. And when we move to the end of kind of moving through each of these pillars, you can see kind of how each site stacks up against each other. And what we see here is that the middle school and Stanley School sites are pretty similar in that they're beneficial in about 4 of the categories, but they do have a couple of issues that need to be overcome. So both schools are located in low congestion, safe areas. The middle school is more central to the student population, and it falls within the walk zone for a large number of students, but there is less space available there for providing pickup and drop off, queuing, and parking as well. And the Stanley School is kind of the opposite, where there's plenty of space for queuing and parking, but it's a little bit further away from the student population and would have less biking and walking. The Hadley School is kind of middle ground where it's a little bit more neutral. It's close to the population and walkable, but all of the traffic would have to empty out onto Route 129, which is a busy roadway, and there are constraints on the available parking and queuing that could be provided as well. The Phillips Park and DPW sites ranked very low in addressing nearly all of the criteria, really. They're both on heavily congested roads with close to crash clusters. They're cut off from a large portion of the population because of the congestion. And they have the potential to create additional congestion and safety issues because of their inability to meet offsite queuing and storage areas as well. So overall, this is kind of showing how things fall in terms of traffic. This certainly isn't the last step in the process. There's always the grading on the curve. So there will be the other items that Lee will talk about next time with the environmental and site related issues that these will also be weighed against.